Hello and welcome back to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, Roman Rudenko. We're here live today in Nuremberg to report on the Nuremberg Trials. Yep, that's right, it's the trial of the century. No, not the Scopes Monkey trial. No, not that thing later on with OJ. That's not even close. We're talking about the real trial of the century here. Nazi war criminals defending their actions to take over the world, right? So they were tried on 3 major counts plus conspiracy to commit those crimes. Crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And this was groundbreaking stuff here because until this point, no one had really considered a group of countries trying the leaders of another country for a warlike action, let alone genocide. There were a few brief trials conducted by Germans against Germans after World War I, but they were largely a joke, with mostly acquittals and a few token prison sentences. And the Allied nations wanted to avoid that fate a second time around. They wanted to have the say of this and make sure Germany took the blame this time that they escaped the first time it was felt, so that it enabled World War II. So, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about 21 defendants overall in the main trial, with several sentences for hanging, several sentences for long-term imprisonment, and a couple acquittals. So this fights the notion of Victor's justice right away, which Goering put forth as a main proponent of main part of his defense. Victor's justice would be what the Nazi kangaroo courts actually did. We haul you up in front of a court and in a courtroom and yell and scream at you, and then we take you out back and hang you. That's not how the Nuremberg trials were done. They were done largely according to American jurisprudence practice, with some British and French thrown in. And we're going to talk about some books here today to cover this stuff, and a couple movies. So we'll start off with Doctors from Hell. Vivian Spitz, 2005. She passed away in 2014, born in 1924. She's from Colorado. She was a court reporter and drafted somehow into the Nuremberg scene. I forget whether she was in the service or whether she was civilian and got into the pool for it, but she was a court reporter, so she's typing the transcripts of what goes on in the trials. And she was attached to the doctor's trial. So here she is reporting on it, and wrote a book long term afterwards. Apparently she got riled up in Colorado by some high school teacher denying the Holocaust was real, and so she put out her rebuttal to it in this book, as well as speaking publicly and before Congress and kind of doing international tours to promote the remembrance of the Holocaust. So this clocks in about 292 pages, and I have to say it was rough going. It was so rough I didn't finish it. I tried. It's like beating my head against a brick wall. It's just not there. This is supposedly a report on the trial of the doctors with attendant testimony, of course. Half of the book is court testimony. But what it really is a bad travel log. I went here and did this. I went there and did that. By golly gee willikers, this is a strange place over here. I've never been outside the country before. Look at all the weird stuff here. It is of very limited value. Unfortunately, I have to say the best thing about it was the photos in it. Just the historical stuff there. There's not too much to report here, no pun intended. It's just not good. It's focused just on the doctor's trial, and I guess she's trying the shock and awe technique of the direct testimony to make you feel the evilness of those doctors. But if you want to do that, there is a far better source than this. Robert J. Lifton's The Nazi Doctors. This is from 86 or 84, somewhere around there. It's a whopper. It's going to clock in about 500 plus pages, and it's largely psychological and in nature, and it's largely in Auschwitz. He's going to talk about some of the other doctors in the other camps with the experiments, but he's pretty much parked his bus in front of Auschwitz because it was, a big center for that kind of experimentation and research by Nazi doctors. I think the title says it all: The Nazi Doctors, and the cover is stark and limited, and that's going to suck you in right away. It's phenomenal. Now, I've read it a long time ago, and I need to read it again before I give a full analysis of it. I think my perspective is going to change now because I'm far more conversant with the final solution and the concentration camps. So my take on it now will be much different than it was originally. But it's dense, and it's definitely bridging that gap right there between popular history and a scholarly study. So some of it can be tough going, but it is phenomenal, and it's far more, despite the fact that she was there on the scene, Vivian Spitz, it's far more interesting and integral to the study of the Holocaust. And I feel like the trial aspect of it, she just doesn't really get at it too well. So there's that. And then next up is going to be the Nuremberg Trials by Paul Rowland. This is on my Kindle, so actually looking pretty decent despite the glare. This is from 2012, and it's very brief, 230 pages. Paul Rowland's kind of an odd guy. He's British, and he's known for being a singer-songwriter. He's recorded over a dozen albums. He's done several dozen books, and he does a lot of Third Reich stuff and occult stuff and music writing. He's kind of a Renaissance man for the 20th, 21st century. I've never heard of the guy before. I didn't know anything about his music. I don't know that I've heard his music, but apparently he's made something, a name for himself, at least in Britain. I don't know anything about it. But this is kind of a bare bones approach here to the. It's a primer for the Nuremberg Trials, and in that it does its job well. It's just brief sketches of each defendant and their background, their crimes, and what they were tried for, and no wasted space here, no wasted verbiage. It's pretty solid for just an intro, with a one chapter summary of the other trials following the main trial at Nuremberg. So for that, I don't think you can go wrong, especially for a bargain Kindle edition. If you just want to know the bare bones of it, there it is. And then the biggest entry of the bunch, the Nuremberg Trial by Anne and John Tusa. And this is the available cover I have because I did it on audio. This is from the 80s, also 84, I believe, first published. Anne and John Tusa are a British couple, and having just passed away recently in 2021, I believe. And I believe John Tusa is still alive. He was born in 1936 in Zlin, Czechoslovakia, and his parents moved him to Britain in 1939. They got out just in time, and he became a professor. His wife has also written a couple books on her own, and they've collaborated on a couple others together. So this is an in-depth study of the Nuremberg Trial. 500 plus pages, and it's very good. Yeah, I give this a 5-star. And I would only say that because I did listen to it rather than read it. I could feel this really bogging down bad into dry desert territory if you read this in print. Because it's really not an exciting topic, all in all. There's no battlefield action. Obviously, there's no drama of who done it. We know who did it, and we know how they did it, and we sort of kind of know why they did it. They're just being put on trial for it. So it can be very dry from that perspective. They do a good job of bringing alive the prosecutors and the full team of the international contingent here that made this happen, and the structure and the background, the dilemma, and the debates over how we conduct this trial and the charges to be brought. The most controversial being Robert Jackson's insistence on conspiracy as a major component of this vast criminal enterprise. It was foreign to European law. They just didn't get it. The French and British and Soviets were like, what do you mean? Conspiracy. We know they did it. And furthermore, they were the legitimate government of Nazi Germany, whether we like it or not. They weren't conspiring behind closed doors. This was government policy. How can you say it was conspiracy? But Jackson insisted on it. And they kind of knuckled under him because the Americans were the big boys in the room. The Soviets had limited input into the Nuremberg trial, surprisingly. Stalin really didn't care too much. He didn't push for this too much. He just wanted to shoot the guys they had in custody, and was upset we hadn't shot the guys we had in custody. But he reluctantly submitted to the idea of a trial before the world, probably banking on it for later propaganda use against the U.S. and Britain, to just a weapon in reserve later on. So the Poles were cut out of being on the prosecution, and so were the Czechs, and they were mighty upset about it. But Jackson and company said, well, we can't have everybody at the table. We'll never get this thing done. Yes, they had legitimate grievances because they were occupied countries and they suffered a hell of a lot from Nazi occupation. But A, the Soviets are opposed to the Czechs and the Poles being there, and we can't really ruffle those feathers all that way. That will make Stalin buck. And B, timeline-wise, we've got to get this done. The focus early on was a quick trial. They really thought they could get this thing done in 30 days, and that kind of naivety is kind of amazing in retrospect. With the amount of documents they had on hand, they had to sift through and organize and read into testimony. One aspect about the structure of the trial was that they couldn't just present a document and have it entered and make photocopies later on for evidence and distribute to all the attorneys. The judges insisted on documents being read into the book in their entirety. So there was a hell of a lot of waste of time with verbal readings of Nazi documents. And you can imagine the paper trail was vast and an inundation for prosecuting lawyers to figure out and sift what's important, what's not, what's redundant, what's not. It must have been an agonizing choice. We've got 10,000 documents here. Which ones come to the top of the pile? Which ones really matter? Especially when you're trying 21 defendants. It must have been a mess. Also a mess was the German defense. Every defendant was allowed to choose their own lawyer, subject to Nazi profiling, see if they had been a member of the party or whether they had Nazi affiliations, yada, yada, yada. So there's some sifting through the chaff for that. But they were all assigned, largely let to have their own choice about their lawyers. And that must have been a Herculean task to try to get these guys acquitted or at least, not hanged. Especially the guy for Bormann. I feel bad for that guy. Bormann's not there, but they still insisted on trying. And the guy's just kind of left twisting in the wind, like, what do I do? I got nothing to say. His own documents incriminate him beyond anything I can do to redeem him. But nevertheless, they went ahead and tried him in absentia. A wise thing to do in retrospect since he was dead. Just chalk it up, make sure you get them all. Now, there's some interesting inclusions here in the defendant list. Among them, Hans Fritzsche from the propaganda department. He's a stand-in for Goebbels. Gustav Krupp. They got the wrong Krupp and didn't want to admit it for a while. And this guy was really sick. He had big-time heart problems and a bunch of other stuff wrong with him. They eventually had to let him go. The Krupp they wanted to try, they couldn't substitute in by law and agreements, and we can't swap defendants here. It's not permissible under our country's law or French law, whatever. So we won't do it here either. And then there's Stryker, Julius Stryker. He's a curious inclusion. He kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me. I never really gave him much thought before. But what is he doing there? Yeah, he's infamous for his propaganda rag, pornographic rag, Der Stürmer, in the 20s and 30s. But he was such a notorious Gauleiter that the Nazi Party kicked him out of his Gau in 1937. He was a very small wheel in a very big machine. And after the 20s, he never had a face-to-face meeting with Hitler again. He was so obnoxious, all the other Gauleiters and people who knew him and ran into him bitched and complained and whined so much that Hitler himself kind of had to let him be booted out of his position. And he didn't like to do that to old comrades. But this guy was so obnoxiously weird and a notorious drunk and, of course, a sadist and accused of rape and this, that, and the other. So he just kind of put out the pasture and please don't bother us again. Thank you for your service kind of thing. But his inclusion in the Nuremberg Trials is very bizarre because of that. He wasn't in the government. He wasn't in the military. He had a very limited role in the rise of the Nazis. So you're prosecuting him for what? Not war crimes. Not crimes against humanity, because he wasn't there to do that. So I guess it's crimes against peace by default and maybe conspiracy. It's a really weak charge. But we hanged him anyway. Again, humanity didn't lose anything by this guy going through the noose, right? Didn't lose anything. Maybe make the world a tiny bit better. But to include him on the list of defendants, to me, is just kind of bizarre. So there, Hans Fritzsche was let off the hook as a stand-in for Goebbels. He had already done some time with the Soviets, and he was a really small cog. He was a radio broadcaster. He made some broadcasts for the regime. Is that illegitimate? Is that a crime against peace? Is that a war crime? No, not at all. So the judges rightly, I think, let him go. Now the guys that were acquitted, they got rearrested, several of them, and put on trial by Germans. That had to be a double whammy there. and most of them were short prison sentences or just let go the second time. So this is a very good read, very good listen. Again, if you read it in print, it might be sleep-inducing, but their big thing they avoided the pitfall of was direct testimony, page after page. There's hardly any of that question and answer that other writers fall prey to. Despite this being a courtroom proceeding and going on for several months, they avoid that pitfall. They'll give you every defendant and their background, the crimes they're accused of, their defense, their lawyers, this, that, and the other. But they do not rely, for the backbone of the book, on direct testimony. Thank goodness. That would have made it unbearable, and I wouldn't be talking about this book right now. So, for that aspect, I give it 5 stars. It really is thorough, and it's not just about the criminals, it's about the prosecution and some of the politics behind the prosecution, as well as the scene in Nuremberg and the immediate post-war Germany. So it's kind of very well rounded for that aspect, and I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. And then we got to finish up. We got some movies to talk about too, don't we? The first one is a classic, and I just saw this a few weeks ago. I had heard of it, I knew about it, but I never watched it before. Judgment Nuremberg from 1961. It's black and white. We have a cast of stars here. We've got Spencer Tracy, Marlene Dietrich, Burt Lancaster, and a young Werner Klemperer before he became Colonel Klink. This is a slightly fictionalized version of the the judge's trial, I should say. Slightly fictionalized because they do use a couple incidents from the actual Nazi Germany as courtroom stuff in here, and this is excellent. Sharp script writing, very good performances. Young Maximilian Schell is in here, just tearing up screen. Marlene Dietrich is perfect as the femme fatale who's kind of sort of wanting to get with Spencer Tracy, but she's leery of him because he's American and he is the judge, and he doesn't back down on the charges against her, against Germans. Her dead husband was part of the military in the film, and he was hanged, and she's pretty bitter about it, and she doesn't like that Spencer Tracy will not back off prosecuting Germans. It's very good, very well recommended. There's some really great cinematography here, but I do get tired of the pans and zoom. The director really kind of went for panning and zooming way too much, but there's some really startling well done shots here. And the opening scene of it was done in Nuremberg itself when despite it being 1961, Nuremberg was still a mess. Very well done. You can't go wrong with that one. And then from 2000, we have a made-for-TV sort of like a 2-part miniseries, Nuremberg. I think it was a Turner Broadcasting Network kind of thing, in conjunction with a British or Canadian firm that made this miniseries. And you got Alec Baldwin, Brian Cox, Christopher Plummer, and Michael Ironside as Colonel Andrus, the prison commandant in charge of the Nazi prisoners. And he kind of almost steals the show at some points. He's got some really nice little scenes. I really thought he was kind of like the life of the party to spruce things up, so to speak. Alec Baldwin trudges through it. It's Baldwin, man. He does what he does, and he sort of does it well, but it's Baldwin. There's an unnecessary love story it doesn't belong here in the first place, but it ends up being a GND anyway. So I don't know why they included it. It just doesn't make sense, and that sticks out really badly. But other than that, it's solid enough. It's watchable, and Brian Cox does a great job as Hermann Goering. So there's that. I prefer the older one over the new one, but they're both watchable, and Judgment Nuremberg is excellent. So that's the Nuremberg Trials for today. I am Roman Rudenko, and hopefully when I get back to Moscow, I won't be sent to the Lubyanka and purged. Here's hoping. Until next time, happy reading.